Good morning. This is Pastor Ben from Grace Christian Church with our Daily Devo. Today I want to do something a little bit different from what we've been doing. We're studying a sermon series in the book of Kings. And I think in some ways it's very important for us to put some kind of historical context around the time period that we're talking about. So if we drew a timeline on our whiteboard and made this today, 2020, and we went about halfway and called that 1000 BC. So we've got 3,000 years spanning this time period. And another 3,000 years spanning this time period. So we put the time of David right here in the center. King David is the first historical subject in the Bible whose date we can pretty much count on by looking at other extra biblical sources and pretty much know for a fact that King David was in around 1000 BC. Now, if we think about that, then Jesus, the birth of Jesus in the year zero, or there was no year zero, but that's close enough, is right about here. So we are 2,000 years removed from Jesus, and David is 1,000 years removed from Jesus on the other side. On the other side of David, right about 1400 or 1500 BC is Moses. So even though Moses is ancient history to David, 500 years before, he's actually closer to David than David is to Jesus. When you get on the other side of Moses, it's a little more murky. You could probably count on the flood, or Abraham being around (2000 BC). The flood is back in here someplace. And then, of course, creation, which we really don't know. There's been some people have done some of the math and said that creation was around 4000 BC. Other scholars think, probably not. It's hard to say. It was a long, long, long time ago. On the other side of Jesus are several events that we aren't all that familiar with. Jesus only lived for 30 years, and then the fall of Jerusalem was in 70 AD. So here we have a fairly basic timeline on biblical history from what we know. Moses and the Exodus from Egypt is probably, or if not the most important event in Israel's history, and one that the prophets point back to over and over and over again, and that also Jesus and the New Testament writers point to a lot, talking about the freedom from slavery in Egypt. Another significant event in Israelite history occurs right about here, right around 600 BC, with the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians and the captivity that occurred at that time. This is another pivotal event in the history of the Bible, and oftentimes the prophets who lived at that time and the prophets who prophesied about the destruction of Jerusalem would use the imagery from the Exodus to describe that same event. And the New Testament writers would often do the same thing. Well, they would use the imagery that the prophets used to describe how things were shaken out with early Christianity and with Jesus. So I tell you all this just to kind of try to give us a sense of the context and the time spans involved. That the people we're studying right now, the people who lived between David and the destruction of Jerusalem, which is really the period that we're talking about with the kings. There's a good bit of time involved. We're going to be studying 400 or 500 years of biblical history by looking at the kings. And it's 3,000 years removed from us. It kind of gives you, it's a little bit of a sobering thought to think that, all the problems that David had, all the things that happened with Solomon, all the things that happened with the other kings and the prophets we'll be studying, their problems are not that much different from ours. That basic human nature has stayed pretty much the same all these years. And that leads me to think about one other thing. If those guys had known that we would be studying and reading about their lives 3,000 years later, do you think they might have lived a little differently? Sometimes we don't realize who may be watching or who may be listening to the things that we say and do. And we should be. We should be trying to live lives of significance and trying to lay down memories, not only for ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren, to look back someday and say, I learned something from my grandfather. I learned faith in God, and I learned how to be loyal to Jesus, and I'm so grateful for that. I'm hoping that's my legacy. I'm hoping my legacy is not like the legacy of the guys that we're going to be studying over the next several weeks. Thank you so much, and go be the church.